December 1941. A small workshop in Waddington, just outside London, is producing what appear to be ordinary board games. Workers carefully assemble Monopoly sets, their hands moving with practiced precision across cardboard properties and tiny metal tokens. But these are not destined for Christmas stockings. Hidden between layers of the game board, concealed with such skill that even close inspection reveals nothing, are silk maps of Germany, compasses disguised as game pieces, and bundles of German Reichsmarks. These games are going to prisoner of war camps across occupied Europe, and they will save thousands of lives in ways their creators never initially imagined. The humble playing card, the innocent board game, the everyday gramophone record, these became some of Britain's most effective escape tools of the Second World War. What started as a modest attempt to help a handful of downed pilots evolved into an industrial operation that would assist an estimated 17,000 Allied prisoners to evade capture or escape from behind enemy lines. The story of how British intelligence transformed children's toys into instruments of liberation remains one of the war's most ingenious operations, and one that the Germans never fully understood, even when the evidence was literally in their hands. By late 1939, the problem facing British intelligence was becoming impossible to ignore. RAF bomber crews were being shot down over occupied Europe at an alarming rate, and the number of soldiers captured during the fall of France had created an unprecedented prisoner crisis. Traditional escape aids, maps printed on paper, metal compasses, were too easily discovered during the thorough searches prisoners endured. Men arrived at camp stripped of everything except the clothes they wore, and sometimes not even those. The Gestapo and camp guards knew every trick, every hiding place. They ripped apart shoe heels, examined coat linings under magnification, X-rayed suspicious packages. Anything obvious was confiscated immediately. The existing system was failing catastrophically. Early war parcels sent through the Red Cross had attempted to smuggle conventional maps and tools, but German efficiency made this nearly impossible. One officer estimated that fewer than 5% of traditional contraband items reached prisoners intact. The searches were thorough, methodical, and increasingly suspicious. They knew the British would try to help their men escape, and they were determined to prevent it. Something radically different was needed, something so innocuous that it would pass through enemy hands without raising the slightest suspicion. The challenge seemed insurmountable. How do you hide navigation tools, maps covering thousands of square kilometres, and currency in items that guards would handle, examine, and ultimately allow through their checkpoints? The solution came from an unlikely collaboration between military intelligence and British manufacturers. MI9, the secret department responsible for escape and evasion, approached Waddington's, the Leeds-based company that held the British licence for Monopoly. The idea was audacious: use the games themselves as concealment devices. Waddington's had the perfect infrastructure. They already produced maps for the military using a specialised silk printing process. Unlike paper, silk maps made no noise when unfolded, could be compressed to the size of a matchbox, and were virtually indestructible when wet. The company's expertise in printing fine detail meant they could reproduce accurate military maps at scales useful for navigation, showing railway lines, roads, forests, and border crossings with remarkable precision. The manufacturing process was extraordinary in its attention to detail. Special Monopoly sets were created on a separate production line, known only to a handful of trusted workers. The game boards were constructed with a hidden cavity between the top playing surface and the bottom layer. Silk maps, printed with escape routes from various camp locations across Germany, Poland, and occupied territories, were folded with obsessive care and inserted into this space. The boards were then sealed so perfectly that not even the slight difference in weight betrayed their secret. A small red dot was placed on the free parking square, invisible unless you knew to look for it, to identify the special sets to prisoners whilst remaining meaningless to German guards. But the genius extended far beyond Monopoly. Playing cards became carriers of map sections. Waddingtons developed a technique where individual cards could be soaked in water, carefully peeled apart along their laminated layers, and reveal map segments printed on tissue-thin paper inside. A complete deck, once disassembled, provided a detailed map of an entire region. The cards appeared entirely normal. They could be played with, handled roughly, even examined closely, without revealing their purpose. Similarly, gramophone records were manufactured with small compasses embedded in their centres, positioned exactly where a normal record would have its paper label. The records played music perfectly, giving guards no reason for suspicion. The Oxfordshire facility, where much of this work occurred, operated under tight security, its true purpose known only to those directly involved. Production numbers remain partially classified even today, but estimates suggest several thousand specially modified games and card decks reached POW camps between 1941 and 1945. Each item was disguised within legitimate Red Cross parcels, mixed with genuine games, books and food supplies. The Germans, who carefully logged every parcel's contents, noted board games and playing cards without suspecting their true nature. The system's beauty lay in its simplicity. Guards saw exactly what they expected to see. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Operational deployment of these tools created results that exceeded even MI9's optimistic projections. At Stalag Luft 3, the camp later famous for the Great Escape, multiple officers used silk maps from modified Monopoly sets to plan their routes. Flight Lieutenant Oliver Philpott, one of the few successful escapees from the Wooden Horse Tunnel, credited a playing card map with guiding him across Germany to the Baltic coast. The cards had arrived in a seemingly innocent package months earlier, and he had painstakingly soaked and separated them, reconstructing the map segments in secret. The level of detail was remarkable. Footpaths through forests, the locations of bridges, even the positions of border guard posts were marked with precision. Records from debriefing interviews with returned evaders, now held in the National Archives, document hundreds of cases where these tools proved decisive. One American pilot, shot down over Bavaria in 1944, spent 3 weeks moving only at night, navigating entirely by a silk map he had received sewn into the lining of a cricket sweater. He reached Switzerland without ever consulting a living soul for directions, the map's accuracy proving so reliable that he later described it as more trustworthy than any local. The psychological effect of possessing these aids was profound. Men who might otherwise have succumbed to despair found renewed determination, knowing that their government had not abandoned them and that escape was genuinely possible. The Germans remained largely oblivious to the scheme throughout the war. Whilst they became increasingly suspicious of parcels and intensified their searches, they never identified the specific method of concealment. Captured maps were occasionally discovered, but guards assumed prisoners had somehow manufactured them in camp workshops or obtained them through corrupt guards. They never imagined the tools arrived in board game boxes. After the war, interrogated camp commandants expressed genuine surprise when shown the modified Monopoly sets, several admitting they had personally handled these games without suspecting anything unusual. Comparing British escape aids to German equivalents reveals a stark difference in approach and effectiveness. The Luftwaffe did produce basic escape kits for their aircrews, small compasses, basic maps, but these were designed for use immediately after bailing out, not for long-term evasion or escape from captivity. German intelligence never developed anything approaching the sophistication of MI9's hidden tool network, partly because they faced less strategic need. Their prisoners were held in Britain, far from home territory and surrounded by ocean, making mass escape attempts impractical regardless of navigation aids. American intelligence, whilst maintaining close cooperation with MI9, initially pursued different methods, focusing more on bribery networks and resistance contacts. However, after observing British success, they adopted and expanded the concealment techniques, adding their own innovations, such as maps hidden in chess pieces and compasses embedded in pen caps. By 1944, the system had become genuinely Anglo-American in scope, with production facilities on both sides of the Atlantic creating modified items tailored for specific camp locations and escape routes. The actual impact of these tools on the war effort remains difficult to quantify precisely. The figure of 17,000 assisted escapees and evaders comes from post-war M19 estimates, though they acknowledged this included men who used the tools for initial evasion after being shot down, not just camp escapes. Some historians argue the number may be conservative, as many evaders never formally reported which specific aids they used. What remains undeniable is the psychological warfare value. Every successful escape required the Germans to divert resources to recapture efforts, and the knowledge that Allied airmen had sophisticated escape networks undermined German morale far beyond the immediate military impact. The innovation influenced post-war intelligence doctrine significantly. The principle that everyday objects make the best concealment for clandestine materials became foundational to Cold War tradecraft. Modern intelligence services still employ variants of these techniques, though the objects have evolved with technology. The silk map principle, in particular, proved so effective that military forces continued issuing them to pilots well into the jet age, only replacing them when GPS technology made physical maps largely obsolete. Several surviving examples of the modified Monopoly sets and playing cards are now held at the Imperial War Museum in London and the International Spy Museum in Washington. Examining them in person, the craftsmanship is remarkable. Even knowing what to look for, detecting the hidden compartments requires careful measurement and comparison with standard sets. The red dot on free parking remains almost imperceptible, a tiny mark that represented hope for thousands of desperate men. The story of these spy tools began in that workshop in Waddington, with workers assembling board games that were far more than they appeared. It ended with thousands of men walking free across borders, navigating by maps they had extracted from playing cards and game boards, guided home by compasses hidden in the most unlikely places. What military planners had conceived as a modest aid for a few skilled escapers accidentally became one of the war's most effective rescue operations, helping more Allied personnel evade capture or return from behind enemy lines than any other single program. The playing card looked innocent, the board game appeared ordinary, and that was precisely the point. Sometimes, the most powerful weapons are the ones the enemy never recognizes as weapons at all. 17,000 men found their way home because someone realized that the best hiding place is in plain sight, and the most effective tool is the one nobody thinks to confiscate. In the great game of wartime deception, Britain's most successful gambit was played with an actual game, and the stakes were measured in lives saved and families reunited.